Good evening. I'm Kat Cizek, and I'm a documentary maker at the National Film Board of Canada with a project called High Rise, and I'm going to be talking about high-rise living. Great cities throughout history and across space often get defined, and also their sustainability, their cultural sustainability, is defined by great buildings, spectacular temples, banks, castles, and cultural monuments. And I just want to play a little game with you guys. This is the interactive portion of the evening. I just want to ask you, we'll go through these slides quickly, but if you happen to know the name of the building or the city that I show you, please do shout it out, and we'll go through them fairly quickly. Chichen Itza. Anybody? Cairo, good. Prague. The Library in Alexandria. Museum of Natural History in London. Al-Shahid Monument and Museum in Baghdad. Anyone? Zurich, Swiss National Bank. Opera House in Copenhagen. Deutsche Bank in Berlin. Art Science Museum in Singapore. This is the Farmers Bank in Owatonna, Minnesota. This is a bank in Hollywood. This one. The Dominion Bank here in Toronto that no longer exists. What do these buildings say about the civilizations that created them? And usually what they tell us is their relationship to gods, to money, and to nationhood. What about this building here? A city's everyday urban fabric, an ordinary residential high-rise building, can tell us more than any other building, I'm going to argue tonight, about our civilization's respect for humanity. Ordinary high-rises are a barometer of this. And that's why I've spent the last 5 years documenting high-rise apartment buildings and the people who live inside them in a project called High Rise at the National Film Board of Canada. We've told stories from places like this, a high-rise in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and like this in the South City in Prague. And this is the largest public housing project in the world in Alamar, near Havana, Cuba, about 20 kilometers east. And we've collected these incredible stories in a high-rise project called Out My Window, and this is our digital high-rise, global high-rise. Every window is a different city in the world. Meanwhile, here in Toronto, back at this building, and this, by the way, we have 1,189 of these post-war concrete high-rise buildings in Toronto, just like this one. And that's more than any other high-rises across North America and in any North American city except for Manhattan. But we actually don't feel this as Torontonians because most of these high-rises are actually, this is a map, thanks to ERA architects, of high-rises spread out very purposefully in the 60s and 70s, pushed out into our peripheries and our suburbs. And so we worked with, just to learn about the lives in these buildings that are so invisible to so many of us. Our team has been working with a group of high-rise residents, Irene, Preeti, Obi, Maggie, Jamal, and Faith. And using photography and photoblogging, the residents have been documenting their lives, have been created stories and photos from their own personal collection over a course of several months. And we then presented these photographs and these stories at City Hall with the former mayor in front of 350 people, urban planners, politicians, bureaucrats, in an effort to amplify residents' voices in the planning process. It was just an incredible evening of political poetry reading. People who had often never spoken in public before, had never been to City Hall, even though they've lived in Toronto for up to 16 to 20 years, never been downtown, taken that 20-kilometer trip downtown. And the idea was to bring the voices of the residents into the city-building agenda of this town. And it really changed the tenor of the conversation around what to do with our high-rises in Toronto. Meanwhile, when things go wrong around the world, the instinct has become to blame the buildings and tear them down. And this has had an incredibly radical impact on the city of these buildings and the citizens that have lived in them. It's happened all over America and in the UK. Here, for example, in the very vilified Chicago Cabrini Green buildings, that have been going down for a decade. I think they're all down now. Or here, for example, in Red Road, also in Glasgow, a very famous or infamous place. The last building went down just a few months ago. And as an alternative to demolition, I've been really inspired by the work of Graham Stewart. He's an architect here in Toronto, and here he is working with, you might recognize Kipling resident Jamal. And he's provided our city and the world with incredible examples of tower renewal. Here are, some of the examples that he's shown us in Amsterdam, refacing the wall, the exterior walls of the building, connecting those buildings back to the city using transportation lanes, all sorts of very simple but incredibly powerful ideas. Here's another one in Prague again. Can you tell I'm Czech? This is the South City. 85,000 people live in South City. It's a huge high-rise community that in the 70s was quite, people didn't want to go there from downtown Prague. Now it's one of the most desired places to live in Prague. And we really discovered that healthy high-rises mean healthy cities. So we decided to do a project at the same high-rise, this one, with Graham and Jamal and other residents and architects. And what we did was did a tour of the high-rise and the space around them. We documented spots that have fallen out of use. This is an old tennis court. And then we had the architects and the residents draw out and reimagine the space around those buildings. And then we turned those incredible illustrations into a film called 1 Millionth Tower, where we took the illustrations and animators brought them to life in a film. A really incredible project. And then we translated all those images into an incredible art campaign in the subway of Toronto. Over 1 million commuters a day would pass through and see the images of a reimagined Toronto above them. So what can we learn from these post-war buildings and what we might do with them, especially for the new high-rises that we're building made of glass? This project took an incredible turn about a year ago when we were approached by the New York Times. Jerry Flahide, who's in the audience tonight, our producer, and I were approached by the New York Times to work on high-rises. They said, hey, high-rises, New York City, maybe we can do something here. And I ended up spending quite a bit of time in their archives to develop a project that we just launched yesterday at the New York Times site on NewYorkTimes.com. It's called The Short History of High-Rise, and I just wanted to show you a quick little trailer of that. This is 30 seconds.